Hey everybody, hey everybody, hey everybody. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The Santita Jackson Show. We are here. We are here. Hey Robert, shalom to you. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Everybody who does come on, just know that this will be aired on AM 950 radio from 6 to 8. But you all are really getting a preview. So that's just to let you know I have to record in advance because the station doesn't have the capacity to carry us live. So that's what you're doing. And so we're kind of front loading these shows because we're coming into the holiday season. And I am going to be taking a little time away. And so, but we're going to give as much to you as we can, maybe a little bit extra. I don't know, because we'll be doing 2 or 3 shows tomorrow. But we're talking about birthright citizenship, which President Trump aims to end. We're up in two. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I am Santita Jackson. It is a joy to be with you today. Let's get right to it. Let's get right to it. Let's get right to it. I'm here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, but I want you to go meet my morning stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. The Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. Please go there. And I am on X at Santita J, at Santita J. Please become my friend there. Share the show there. And the Santita Jackson Show, share the show, share the show. Everybody, please thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. That helps our algorithm when you do that. So like the show. Please like the show. Hey, Barbara G. And Monday afternoon greetings to you. And Tuesday morning greetings to our people in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and all around the state. And everybody, please meet me on Blue Sky. Santita Jackson bsky.social. I'm getting more friends as we speak. I'm so excited about that. So let's talk about birthright citizenship, which is something that President Trump aims to end. So, how will that work? How will that work? What is birthright citizenship? How did it come about? How did we end up with that? So, let's talk about this, everybody. Let's talk about this here on the Santita Jackson Show, on the Santita Jackson Show. Let me pull from this article about it, because indeed, President Trump has talked about it, and it seems like he is really going to push for this policy. And birthright citizenship is actually an amendment to the Constitution, one of the so-called slave amendments. But Attorney Mark Fancher, the brilliant legal mind, is going to explain all of that to us. But let me give you this oversight of what happened, because President Trump was on an interview on NBC this past weekend, and he said, you know what we're going to do is really deport them. And so, according to this article from the Deccan Herald, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump aims to deport all immigrants in the U.S. illegally over his 4-year term. He plans to stretch this out over 4 years, but he wants a deal to protect so-called dreamer immigrants, he said in an interview that aired on NBC this past Sunday. And he also plans to take executive action on his first day in office to end birthright citizenship. So, what is birthright citizenship? And I want to hear what your thoughts are. Do you know what birthright citizenship is? What do you think about this? And it really, Mark Fancher, uh, Black people who had been formerly enslaved really have everyone who comes here, who has a baby here, who has a child here, who's a citizen, they have Black people to thank for this, right? I mean, so tell me, what is birthright citizenship and how did it come about?
Well, as you alluded to, the U.S. has a sinful history, and many say that the original sin of the U.S. is the enslavement of African people. I would suggest that the original sin perhaps was the territorial theft from the indigenous nations
Yes, yes.
and the genocide that was carried out against them. But if you look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, the only reference to enslaved African people is a reference to them as counting as 3/5 of a human being for purposes of congressional apportionment. And that was the result of a deal that was struck between white Southern planters and those in the North. The white Southern planters realized that for all practical purposes, they were outnumbered by Black people in the South that they were holding in bondage, and that because their economy was agricultural, there was a sparse population of white people in that region. And when it came time to apportion for congressional representation, that they were getting the short end of the stick, and that the more densely populated areas of the North were going to have more representation than they would have. So, this provision of the Constitution was intended to allow them to use their property, their human beings that they owned, it allowed to count them as three-fifths of a person when they were dividing up congressional representation. The noteworthy thing about this is that they could be used for purposes of apportionment, but these three-fifths of a human beings were not regarded as citizens of the United States. They were not regarded as people who would have any right to participate in the political process. They were only there to be used as political placeholders by these white men. And so, to the extent that anybody thought that Black people had any kinds of rights at all, then the US Supreme Court dispelled all of those notions in the Dred Scott versus Sanford opinion, which uh, was came about in the 1800s when an enslaved Black man whose owner had taken him into free territory tried to litigate his way into freedom by saying that because he was in free territory, that therefore he was now a free man. The U.S. Supreme Court, in the most emphatic way that it could say, told him and every other Black person that they had no rights in the United States, that they were not regarded as a part of it. Nobody ever contemplated that they would be a part of it. That had the authors of the Declaration of Independence even contemplated making Black people a part of the United States, then they would not have enjoyed the universal respect that they enjoyed. It was a despicable idea to even consider Black people as being a part of the United States. And so that pretty much made it clear that African people, whether they were enslaved or not, really were not part of the United States. So at the time that slavery was abolished, and they sought to make adjustments with the idea that formerly enslaved African people now could actually be part of the United States, then there were amendments to the Constitution that were intended to address whatever implications there may have been from either Article 1, Section 2, or Dred Scott opinion, or any other decisions that may have come about beforehand. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery and said that you could no longer hold people in bondage, and you could not even engage in practices that in any way suggested the badges or incidents of slavery. The 14th Amendment is a very complicated amendment. It addresses many, many things. But for purposes of this discussion, the most significant provision relates to the fact that it doesn't matter that a person might have been brought here involuntarily and may never have been granted citizenship, that if they gave birth to a child on U.S. territory, in the U.S. territory, then that child, by virtue of having been born in the U.S., was automatically a citizen. So from that point forward, that amendment was not race specific, even though the Black people were contemplated in its enactment, uh, but it applies to everyone. And from that point forward, there have been many people who have immigrated here, who've come here, not necessarily lawfully, but they've come here, they've given birth to children, and those children have been regarded as citizens of the United States. And that is the provision that I presume that Donald Trump seeks to eliminate.
But he wants to leave the dreamers alone. It's according to the press report. What does that? Who are the dreamers? I mean, because I see there are different categories here, and I want to be clear on who we're talking about.
Well, these are people who have, and I can't speak definitively or extensively
Hmm.
on how that works, but these are people who have um, come here. They've been here for, these are children who've been here for extended periods of time. They may not have been born here, but they've been here. They have contributed. They've been, you know,
But you
engaged.
go where your parents bring you, right? So this is
Right.
all you know.
Right. They're innocent in this whole thing, and they are presumed to be on a pathway to gaining lawful citizenship here or lawful residence, and these are a little different from people who they're treated differently from people who knowingly and purposely come in without complying with the laws that govern immigration.
We're talking with attorney Mark Fancher about birthright citizenship. This is one of the slave amendments, as they call it, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment that were, uh, well, they were born out of the Civil War. Black people were freed from slavery. Black people were given citizenship. Black men were given the right to vote on paper. And so now, when we're hearing that birthright citizenship is something that President elect Trump seeks to end, it's a discussion. And we want to have the discussion with you. What do you think about birthright citizenship if you are born here? Should you automatically be a citizen? In other countries, it takes generations to be brought into citizenship, if you will. But in America, you can be born into it. So tell me, tell me, what do you think? Barbara Jean and Robert and Lewis and so many of you who are watching, let us know what you think. What, you know, in Chicago and all around the country, you see that migrants have been brought into the United States, and they've been brought into the United States by corporations who are trying to get them as cheap labor. I mean, the country has done that. And I think that that's why I've read to you all extensively the Tent Partnership for Refugees and uh, the fact that one of our leading entrepreneurs, one of our leading oligarchs, if you will, partnered with our government to create this program to bring people in from their indigenous lands so that they could get to work. And they're working for our corporations. And while we are in many, many places, now you have American workers suing, for example, Tyson's Foods, because they're saying you're hiring them, you're not hiring me. They're not even citizens. There's a real fight now, Attorney Mark Fancher, about housing people who are not citizens while we have homeless people in the United States, um, subsidizing them, even though we're really doing that in partnership with corporations. What do they say? We don't have a democracy, we have a corporatocracy. That is, I think it's true. I mean, talk to me. I mean, what, when you end birthright citizenship, what does that mean? And how would we be impacted by that?
Well, I think we really have to sort of back up and look at this entire question of immigration and the so-called border crisis.
Hmm.
And it's really a crisis for the world that is not created by these poor, wretched masses that are trying to come across a border. They're not the responsible ones. We have to look at the oligarchy that you referred to, and they have been here from the beginning. They've grown in terms of their scope and size and reach. But from the very beginning, this country has been intended to be for the benefit of a small elite group, originally a small group of elite white property men, and nobody else. They may have used the rhetoric and the language of democracy, but it was never intended to be a democracy. It was always intended to be a vehicle for the continuing enrichment of this small elite group, and everybody else was to be here for their use and for their benefit, manipulation, so that they could enhance their financial standing, and that's it. And so you had large numbers of poor white people who were brought over here as indentured servants, and even after that practice was abandoned, they remained desperately poor, working in factories and textile mills and in other places, making pennies a day for the benefit of this elite group. You certainly had Africans who had been enslaved and who were brought here and who were used for their labor and for otherwise for purposes of enriching people. You had the indigenous nations. They tried to enslave them, but they were not uh, really manageable because they knew the territory too well, and they were able to fight back and resist a little bit more effectively than other groups of people. And so that was the domestic reality for this elite group. As the years have gone by, this elite group has expanded beyond just individual white men to include white families and in some cases, families that are not white, that are very wealthy. It has included large corporations, and it has included a number of other entities that really dominate the country and its politics and its economy. And in the course of their continuing their efforts to manipulate and use and exploit and abuse everybody else, they've reached beyond the borders of the United States. For a long period of time, they were responsible for what came to be known as quote unquote banana republics in Central America and South America. These are countries that uh, that were exploited because of their ability to produce agricultural products, primarily fruit and other things. And in order to ensure that the labor to produce that was never paid very much and that they could reap super profits, the oligarchy would establish dictators who were, in exchange for large sums of money, really the overseers for the countries that were being exploited and dominated. And in order for them to keep their populations under control, very often they would institute uh, armies of goons and thugs, cutthroat mercenaries, and others who would terrorize their own populations. And the result was that entire populations of people in Central and South America were living in grinding poverty and in terror because of what was being done in order to keep them under control. There were a few countries that were able to climb out from under that. Cuba was able to do it through its revolution. Nicaragua was able to do it. Venezuela was ultimately able to do it. But for the most part, in a lot of countries like Guatemala, Costa Rica, El Salvador, and places like that, life was miserable and
Mhm.
continues to be miserable for many of the countries, many of the people who live in those countries. And the amount of money that these people are generating for this oligarchy, which is headquartered in the United States, is massive. But these people trying to escape from that run away from their own countries and try and get into the United States for refuge and for a better way of life. And when they come across the border looking for a relief from the misery that has been caused by the United States, then the United States demagogues, the people like Donald Trump and others, point the finger at them and say that they're the problem, that they're causing problems for the United States, when in fact it's the United States that's responsible for all of it in the first place. And it's not just limited to Central and South America. Haiti right now is in absolute chaos and turmoil, and it has been ever since the revolution back in the early 1800s. when under the leadership of formerly enslaved and enslaved Black people, they were able to defeat Napoleon's army, and they were able to establish the first country that made slavery illegal. And they were able to do it in a way that inspired Black people throughout the world. We frequently talk about Nat Turner's rebellion and others. He and others were inspired by the Haitian Revolution. And the empire never forgave Haiti for that. And they have done everything that they can to keep that country in turmoil and chaos as a lesson to anybody that would dare try and resist. And so the misery of the people in Haiti is the direct result of deliberate efforts that have been made over the years to keep that country subjugated uh, under the with the active participation of local Haitians like the Duvalier family, who was brutal, and they did a perfect job for the empire by terrorizing the population, keeping it living in the most abject poverty. And its successors, and even now, the Clinton family is implicated and involved in much of the turmoil that's currently plaguing that island. And so then, when Haitians who are struggling and poor find their way out of the country to try and get relief, they come into the United States and they live responsible lives and live as productive citizens that none of their neighbors complain about. You have people like Donald Trump who say that they're savages and that they're eating cats and dogs. So that's the tragic irony of it. It's the tragic contradictions that are present in all of this. And when there is some plan that's announced to eliminate birthright citizenship, then what that can only mean is that it gives even greater opportunity in this case, the President of the United States or anybody else, to further control and manipulate populations of people, to exclude people who they don't want to have here, and to, in effect, criminalize them just for being present on U.S. soil.
We're talking with attorney Mark Fancher about birthright citizenship. What do you think about it? A lot of people, as we bring Dr. David Gibbs into the conversation, the revolt of the rich. Attorney Mark Fancher, there could not be a better book, a book that is more apt for this time. But I ask people to also go to your writings. Are you on Substack, Mark Fancher?
No, no, I'm not. But
I
books
wish
can be
you,
bought by
please.
through Amazon.
Okay, well, I mean, because I'd love for you to pull all the things that I've read on Black Agenda Report and all of these writings that I've been reading of yours down through the years, archive them and put them up there because people really need to key into your thinking. Because it is, what's not negotiable are facts. You can have your opinion, but it's the facts. And I appreciate that you and Dr. Gibbs really are rooted and grounded in history. In fact, I mean, that's so important as we talk about birthright citizenship because I'm trying to figure out with this revolt of the rich, and they continue to revolt, and they are getting more, they're getting richer every day, Dr. Gibbs. They're making more money off of more people are getting poorer and poorer. They're the small, it's not even the 1%, they're getting richer and richer. And now, I mean, I'm trying to figure out, you know, birthright citizenship. As you look at it as an historian, what is it? What does it mean? And particularly because it's not, this discussion is not happening in a vacuum, Attorney Fancher and Dr. Gibbs. You see all over the country, in Chicago, in New York, just wherever migrants have been taken, they're always put in Mark in poor neighborhoods that are under resourced. They're black neighborhoods. And particularly in Chicago, you've seen uh, Black people really fighting for their lives. And they've had to say, look, I'm not against giving someone a chance, but you are helping them. And I never got my 40 acres and a mule. I'm, I'm homeless here. I've done all my work. The Staple Singers had a brilliant song many years ago. You might have heard it. When will we be paid for the work we've done? Ironically enough, I heard it sung in Africa at the Soul to Soul Festival. It was a celebration of Ghanaian independence. And that is how they closed their set, singing, really delivering a message from those of us who are in the United States or who are in the Americas, who are part of the diaspora. And we were coming home. This is 1971 when everyone was coming home. I was a little girl, and my parents, this was my first overseas trip. And I'm so grateful that they not kind of, that they really set that standard for me. What do you make of this? I mean, because now I know that different communities have a different approach to birthright citizenship. Because Black people in America, in the main, do not have an immigrant story. We have the slave story, which, so, our approach is different on birthright citizenship because after being here for a couple hundred years, even after the Civil War, we were not citizens. That was a fight. What say you?
The origins of this idea of birthright citizenship, as I understand it, is the 14th Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And that basically is what defined um, anybody born on American territory is an American citizen automatically. I'm not sure if it was really clearly defined what meant citizen
Mm-hmm.
in legal sense quite so clearly. Before that, I should add that borders were pretty porous up until after World War One. Passports were not widely used until after World War One. And so there was not that much border control at that time in any case. And bottom line is that this is a constitutional matter, not just a matter of statute. And so it's very hard for me to understand. Perhaps Mark Fancher, being an attorney, I'm not an attorney, can comment more on this. But my understanding is that Trump would not be able to overturn this thing without a constitutional amendment, which is impossible under existing political circumstances. There's too much partisan rancor to get the kind of enormous sort of supermajorities required for constitutional amendment. This is a constitutional matter, so just issuing an executive order or even an act of Congress, that wouldn't do it. I suppose maybe you can issue an executive order and start banning birthright citizenship, but it would be very quickly overturned in the courts.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine how the courts could avoid overturning that. So I think it's just bluster on his part, as far as I can tell. I think Mark Fancher is nodding, so I think I'm right on this. And so,
what cultural what signals is he sending then?
naturally, an America First nativist signal. He knows very well, as we all know, that one of the biggest issues in this last election, one of the reasons he won, was a perception that Biden had been, quote unquote, too lenient on the issues of immigration. There were too many immigrants, all in quotes. And that was a widespread reason. A lot of people across the political spectrum and across, it was very much a multiracial, multicultural coalition that did have real doubts about the idea of too many, in quotes, too many immigrants. And so he's responding to that there is indeed popular support for some kind of restrictions on immigration. The problem is what he's proposing here is blatantly unconstitutional. There's just no way he can do this and get away with it. So I don't really see this amounting to very much. I think it's just a way of signaling politically and rhetorically that he's going to take very seriously the idea of restricting immigration. So it just seems like a rhetorical flourish. I have no doubt he's going to restrict immigration.
To whom? Certainly not to Slovenians like his wife Melania.
I guess not.
I don't know. It's just a guess. I mean, I just think this is so ironic, that our first lady was not born in the United States, and even her entry, and I'm not picking on her, everybody, really, because she's a wife, she's a mother, she's the first lady, and I respect that. I do. But the grace that we give to Hunter Biden, who, if the laws that his father pushed and authored, if they were applied to him, he'd be in prison right now.
Oh, definitely. That's
Right.
right.
Now. He didn't do powder cocaine, he did crack.
Yep.
Okay? But he was able to go to Yale, become a lawyer, become an international businessman, make millions of dollars, and now he's got a pardon. So his record has been wiped clean.
Yep.
Okay. Melania Trump, who is a model, who by all accounts is someone who's a very intelligent woman. But she came here on a genius grant as a model. I mean, on a genius visa. And she was with Donald Trump at the time, someone who was not an inconsequential man, someone who could help to, grease the wheels for her to become a citizen. And is America still for white people? Is that what, I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Because we're talking about all these brown people who were brought to Chicago, and 38,000 Ukrainians were brought here from Ukraine to be settled in Chicago.
Yep.
With jobs, fast-tracked with supplements, okay? And they were fast-tracked for citizenship. They have been. What's my takeaway now? And now I've got this conversation. And the birthright citizenship hits me because I am a descendant of people, Mark, who were enslaved.
Yeah, I was just going to insert a footnote. I think David Gibbs is absolutely right, in terms of the law. I think what could happen potentially, though, is that the language in the 14th Amendment concerning this is just ambiguous enough that there are arguments that are made for a different interpretation. And that Trump, by executive order or otherwise, might proceed down this road, just based on the authority that he has and his interpretation of that. And it would immediately be challenged with litigation. But in the interim, there's a significant amount of damage that could be done, if he's really serious about trying to do this.
But what damage? What could happen? What could he do?
Oh, deportation of people who really should not be deported.
Mark, if it's okay, I'd like just to ask a question based upon the fact that you have legal training. If I'm not mistaken, though, this is just so clear-cut legally and constitutionally. I am assuming this would be fast-tracked in the courts. It would be overturned very quickly. That's my understanding. Am I correct on that?
We would hope so. I think that if he wanted to, how much damage could he do, even with fast-tracked litigation, which is sometimes a misnomer because there's very little in litigation that's really fast, except in cases where there's, an immediate need for, a temporary restraining order or something like that. But yeah, it's, and I agree with you. I think it's really more a political gesture than anything else, and send a signal.
And I think that's what's concerning Attorney Fancher and Dr. Gibbs, before I bring on Dr. LaShawn Latrice, because she's an activist here in Chicago and has been watching how the migrant crisis has played out in Chicago. And I think it's important to bring that up because I'm wondering how, because so much in American political life, Dr. David Gibbs, the author of The Revolt of the Rich, if you want to understand why we are where we are, the pushback against all of the gains that we made in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and into the 70s, you need to read The Revolt of the Rich because they did come out swinging. My father said, maybe the subtitle should have been, Jesse Jackson said, slave masters never retire. It's just, wow. And so I'm going to bring you up, Dr. Latrice, because I want to hear your thoughts. I want to know how this plays out politically and socially, because that to me is the concern, because we are living down here with each other, fighting each other. Because of course it's a constitutional amendment, so it would have to be overturned constitutionally in the courts. It would have to go to the Supreme Court. But the social animus and unrest is something that I feel, and that is concerning. Attorney Fancher, Dr. Gibbs, whoever wants to take a stab at that.
I think that one of the things you're seeing is that There is definitely a popular sentiment that there has been too much immigration, particularly what's called illegal immigration, which has increased in recent years. For a long time, I was rather dismissive of this issue, honestly, but I was very struck in Arizona how much I was misled on this, honestly. I assumed this was just a question, a racial issue, of just basically white people opposing brown people immigrating. In Arizona, that's not the case. And I've seen this very clearly that the Latino vote, including recent immigrants from Mexico, a sizable number of them, are very concerned about what they consider to be excessive illegal immigration. And so I think this is something the Democratic Party and the political left does need to address. And I would say the way a progressive view on this, in my view, would be to focus upon how the United States has destabilized countries through wars and punishing sanctions that make people miserable. One of them, for example, the Ukrainians. You mentioned large numbers of Ukrainians are coming here to this country. And the reason is the United States deliberately provoked a war there and kept the war going and blocked peace negotiations. And that's one of the reasons we're getting Ukrainian immigrants. And that's happened again and again and again and again. The war on terror did that. All the sanctions we've imposed against countries like Venezuela have fueled Venezuelan immigration. And so I think perhaps a more progressive viewpoint on this, one that would be more politically viable, would be to focus on how the United States itself drives surges of immigration to this country, rather than arguing, for unlimited immigration, abolish border controls, abolish ICE, as some people have argued. I think that's just not a winning proposition. I just don't see politically how that can be sold to the public at this point in time. So I think maybe approaching this in a more politically savvy way would be a wise thing to do for the political left here. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that even with the Latino reaction to this, that in some ways it's still racial. And this is where it gets a little bit disturbing, in that I think that white privilege has been held up as such a prize in this country historically for so long that people aspire to it. And we saw it early in the US history when not every white person was white. If you were Polish, if you were Italian, if you were any of a number of what are now called ethnics, you weren't really white. And so you earned your way into white privilege over time. And as there was a need for more white people in the country. And I think that there are groups, people, even communities of color now, that aspire to that. And there
like
are,
East Indians. I mean, they fought to be classified as white people, and they took that up to the Supreme Court, and they won.
yeah. And so you have people who are, immigrating from Spanish-speaking countries who go through whatever they need to go through in order to get here, to become lawful residents or to become citizens. And they begin to believe that because they've been given a green card, that now they're entitled to white privilege. And so when these other people start coming across illegally, quote unquote, then they are just as resentful as anybody else, and they think that they're going to jump them in line when they went through all of the trouble. They jumped through all the hoops in order to become to have white status here. And now these other people are coming in, and so they're going to crowd them out or take things that should belong to them. You see that in Black communities where you have resentment and tension between Black communities, Latino communities, Asian communities, because everybody's fighting over these scraps. It's unfortunate when the real cause for all of this division and tension is located in the suites, in executive offices, corporate headquarters, and other places. That's the real source of the problem, and we're turning on each other when we really should be turning to each other in order to go after the real enemy.
And they intend for that to happen, and we're missing that. I mean, because we're fighting each other, not fighting for each other, fighting each other, and we're not looking at. I mean, and it's I don't know what else to do on this show. I continue to talk about the Tent Partnership for Refugees, and no one wants to hear me. I'm bringing up Dr. LaShawn Latrice now. I mean, she's in Chicago, and you have been in the midst of these meetings, and you're in the community, and you're hearing the struggles because it's the Latino community who are American, who might have just immigrated here, and they might have gotten their citizenship, or they might be on track for it. They're pushing back against the illegal immigrants and migrants, and now into this discussion, you've got birthright citizenship, which was born of the struggle to what to do about the African American. I mean, because I'm rereading Lerone Bennett's book, Forced into Glory. You remember that, uh, Dr. Gibbs and attorney Mark Fancher? Abraham Lincoln's White Dream. I mean, he didn't want, you got to read it. Lerone Bennett was the chief historian at Johnson Publishing Company. He was Dr. King's classmate at Morehouse College. He wrote Before the Mayflower. He was perhaps our preeminent historian, and John Johnson of Johnson Publishing Company had the presence of mind and the sense of history to have an historian on staff. And every month in Ebony, you were going to get some well-researched historical overview of our history that you didn't know. The first time I read about Sally Hemings was in Ebony, and that was in the 70s. You know, they said, no, 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 she lived in the White House, all of that. So, I mean, Dr. Latrice, what do you see? I mean, as we're now hearing about birthright citizenship, which, was born of what to do about the Black people in Chicago, not in Chicago, in the United States after slavery. And it's a constitutional amendment. So it's not as simple. Attorney Fancher and Dr. Gibbs rightly point out that you can't just by the stroke of a pen end that. But the discussion is out here. What do you make of it?
It seems like we're going in the same direction that we were a few years back when we were talking about removing DEI, removing affirmative action, removing anything that benefits people who have been disenfranchised. I don't agree with many of the changes, and I'm glad that it's something that will not easily be able to be done. But I also think that this is a clear indication of us taking so many steps backwards in history. And I think that these type of actions that are taking place shows what is going on in the world today as far as how the extent of white supremacy prevails over our lives on a daily basis.
So, do you think that birthright citizenship should be taken away?
No,
Why not?
because if it was something that could benefit people based on where their nationality is based on, or where their citizenship is accredited to, or we don't want to change that because it now displaces a number of different people, and you already have a group of people that are telling people to go back to Africa, go home, go, all these old crazy things. So just imagine, could you imagine now what would happen if this was moved out of place? What will happen now with what the status of the world is, and how we already deal with so much structural racism?
Hmm. I'm trying to see how this is going to play out and where this will go, because with this Supreme Court and just politically, I don't quite know where we're going to go with all of this. I really don't. And what concerns me, I see the vitriol. If you look at the city council meetings in Chicago, they are on fire.
Absolutely.
I mean, you see the anger, Attorney Fancher, Dr. Gibbs, that is directed toward a mayor who's doing the best that he can. I've even told him, I'm like, hey, because I've known him a long time. I'm like, look, you need to get someone else who's your ally to talk about the Tent Partnership for Refugees.
Mm-hmm.
Because these corporations, they're the ones who are bringing everybody in. They want Venezuela without Venezuelans so they can take it over. Like they want Syria without a leader so they can chop it up. It's like the Berlin Conference all over again. Oh, I mean, Dr. Gibbs, what are we doing? It just seems like this is, I mean, even Donald Trump over in France is reported to have said the world is a crazy place right now. Really?
Well, part of it as people have said, as Mark Fancher and others have said, is that there's an element of circus to this. That this is immigration is a real issue, but it's also a symbolic issue. It plays into the line America First, and it is indeed a way of getting people to fight with each other, poor people, vulnerable, weak people to fight with each other, rather than banding together. It is true the rich love these kinds of culture wars. Rich have funded culture wars many times. In the 1970s, I mean, this is something I document. Much of the culture wars of the 1970s, fights over abortion rights and so on. These things were heavily funded by the very wealthy, including people who had no strong opinion on things like abortion rights either way. Saw this as a wedge issue. And in private, they were very explicit about what they were doing. I've seen private conversations where they openly advertise this is a great way of distracting people from wealth concentration and things like that. And I've no doubt that's happening now too. A lot of the discussions about things like fights about gender affirming care and that kind of thing. It's an issue in itself, but it's also is a way of getting people to fight with each other and distract people from wealth concentration and power and money and its role in politics. That's certainly true, and that's happening here as well. So I think we should be very much alert to the way this is playing into the hands of the very rich. At the same time, there are studies that do show that immigration does lower wages for certain categories of workers, and it does drain. In Chicago, you've seen this too, that it puts a stress on social services and the public purse and so on. It is a problem. There's no doubt it's a real problem. And so I think that a lot of my friends, and I say this too, that, just forget about immigration. We need open borders. We need unlimited immigration if that's what people want to do. I think that's politically not viable. And so I think it's a mistake, basically, to call for these types of things. And because I just don't see that that's something that can be sold to the public, particularly to working class people. So based on that, I would prefer some kind of compromise on this issue, rather than taking an extreme position of people like AOC and the Squad and so on. I don't think that's going to work very well.
No, it does not. John Walsh says that your show spreads the same GOP Putin propaganda one finds on Fox, the Daily Wire, and other right-wing outlets about Dems. All your guests seem to have one thing in common: absolute hatred of the Democratic Party.
I could respond to that. I don't like the Democratic Party. I'll be very frank about that. I am not a fan of the Democratic Party, which I think has played a major role in concentrating wealth and advantaging the rich, as well as starting needless wars all over the world. So I will say very frankly, I'm not a fan of the Democratic Party. And, people can draw whatever conclusions they wish.
Yeah, well, David Gibbs speaks for me.
Well, I can say this.
Amen.
Well, I'm a registered Democrat. I'm an independent one. One of the things that we sought to do, or my father sought to do, and the people he worked with, was the Democratic plantation in Chicago. If you go back to 1972, he and Alderman Bill Singer did what was seemingly impossible. They unseated the most powerful mayor in modern American history. Man had a lock on literally every block in the city of Chicago. That is why the Kennedys came here when they needed 100,000 votes, so John Kennedy could become president. The thing is, as a Democrat and as someone who has worked to strengthen the republic and really make democracy real, I have reserved the right as an adult to criticize whomever I choose, particularly if I'm supporting you. I don't do plantations well, John Walsh. I run away from them. And my manumission papers, I've got them. So I'm not playing that game. So don't play with me. Don't play here. The thing is, as Americans, we ought to have the right to speak freely and to speak up and speak out. And what you're trying to do is shut down conversation. And that's very dangerous. It's anti-American, at least as America's been explained to me. When my father ran for president, he said, I might lose my life. And that was a hard thing for all of us to hear. I was 19, my brother Jesse 18, Johnny 17. My sister was about 7 or 8. She didn't quite know. Yusuf was about 10. You know, he said, but I want to take the ceiling off of your ambitions and we got to make America right. And part of making America right is having the tough conversations. So I'm not on that list of people who the Democrats paid to spout their propaganda. No. You want to talk to my audience, you can talk to them. I'm clear you need sponsors and all of that, but what I'm trying to do is have conversations out here that can make this thing work. We're fighting out here, and you don't need to fight me. Have I been a contributor on Fox? Yes, for years. And they honestly gave me space politically that I wouldn't have gotten on MSNBC or CNN because I'm not reading Democratic talking points. All I'm trying to do is find truth here. That's why I brought this panel together so that we could talk about birthright citizenship and how this is going to play with us because we are fighting each other instead of fighting for each other. Period. We've got a lot of work to do. So, my friends, stop spreading misinformation and stop trying to stop the conversation. Enough of that. We're adults here. And we should, and we do, as Americans, have the right and the obligation to speak about our experiences. Teddy Roosevelt, no less, said dissent is the highest form of patriotism. So that's what I'm going to do. I want to get closing thoughts in under a minute from each of you. And I want to thank you so much for being here today. And thank you, Jerry. You're so sweet. Dr. LaShawn Latrice, in under a minute, your thoughts on birthright citizenship. And I mean, do you agree with it, disagree with it? And just this whole conversation about who is a citizen. Oof.
I think that I don't agree with removing it. I think the notion of questioning or even making this a topic of conversation is one of these divide and conquer tactics, as some of my fellow panelists have said. I also think that we have to pay attention to what's not being said when these type of conversations happen. And it's more important to pay attention to that than the rhetoric that's being spewed in front of us because the distraction is real and it's really designed for us not to stay on top of the real issues. And so once we're one step ahead of everything and we collectively can do that, then we'll be a lot smarter and we can move in a more united fashion. Until then, we're going to be behind the 8 ball.
Well, Dr. David Gibbs, author of the book, The Revolt of the Rich. This is what we're seeing. And they are revolting, but they're coming together across party lines, Democrats and Republicans. They all work together.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Thiel and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, they are all in the same club and they all work together, y'all. They have us relegated to parties fighting each other. That's the joke.
Yep. Yep.
David Gibbs, Dr. Gibbs.
I think that the idea of abolishing birthright citizenship is something we really need to, frankly, stop talking about because it's settled, very settled law. It's in the Constitution. And so that's not going to change. I think this is just empty demagoguery by Donald Trump. I don't really see it any other way. That's just a way of energizing his base and things of that sort. I do think, though, that we should not avoid a serious and adult discussion about the issue of immigration and enforcement of immigration law. And I think that's something that should not just be a left-right issue. I think there should be progressive engagement in this issue that should go beyond the idea of just unlimited immigration. As I said, that's not a viable option. And so I think the left really needs to engage this issue in a more productive way, trying to think of solutions to keep people from having to flee their countries due to American policy that destabilized their countries. And so I think the focus from the left should be on not making people so miserable in places like Venezuela and Cuba that they have to leave.
The corporations that they sponsor, because that's what's happening. We're tearing these countries apart so we can take their resources.
That's right.
And we're ultimately not going to win that one, you guys. We're not. Attorney Fancher, why don't you close this out?
Well, I think that dialectics says that there's positive and negative in everything. And so there's a lot negative in raising this question about birthright citizenship because we know the sinister thinking and purposes behind it. But at the same time, it can be a prompt for us to begin to think about some even more fundamental and basic things, such as who gave anybody the right to even make this amendment about citizenship on territory that was stolen from an indigenous population that never has had justice done for it in the first place. And, you know, to even who gave anybody permission to establish the United States of America. And who gave permission to anybody to say to formerly enslaved African people that you will be a citizen. That the Republic of New Africa political formation has always said that people should have been given a choice. They should have been given a choice to decide whether they wanted to be citizens of the US, whether they wanted to return to Africa, whether they wanted to do something else. Nobody was ever given that choice. So the fundamental injustices that are really the foundation of America, or the United States of America, really are worth thinking about and discussing. And beyond that is just the basic notion that we're all children of God and that we shouldn't even be dealing with the issue of borders. As a world community of oppressed people and working people and people who want justice, we need to come together to ensure that every country is free, independent, and prosperous so that nobody has a need to try and flee their country. Those forces in the world which continue to create turmoil and oppression and exploitation need to be overthrown. And the time is long past for a world revolution of people who are excluded, oppressed, denied, marginalized, and exploited to come together and to pull that off.
Well, as the song says, we who believe in freedom cannot rest, and we shall overcome. We will. We just have to keep pushing, everybody. Thank you, Attorney Mark Fancher. Dr. David Gibbs, everybody get the book. The name of your book, we got to get it under the Christmas tree. Mark Fancher.
The Negroes of Friends Village. You can get it on Amazon.
And Dr. David Gibbs, your book?
Revolt of the Rich, How the Politics of the 1970s Widened America's Class Divide.
I'm waiting on your book, Dr. LaShawn Latrice.
Thank you. I'm working on it.
I know. Community psychologist. Okay, everybody, keep your mouth shut because she's examining us as we speak. I'm not going to pass that test. In the next hour, let's continue this conversation. I know you all want to do that. And as we speak, it turns out that the gentleman who has been accused of shooting and killing Brian Thompson has been arrested. This light-skinned person is actually an Italian American, Ivy League graduate, master's in engineering. And he has a message. We're going to be talking about that too. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes.